The hall smelled of desperation dressed in perfume. Lady Vera Ashford stood at the back of the receiving room, not because she had been placed there, but because she had long ago learned that the back was the only place no one looked at you with calculation. She held a book against her chest like a shield and watched her father present her sister to the most dangerous man in 3 kingdoms. Alpha King Kalen of Duskmere stood in their modest hall like a storm that had decided, for the moment, not to break. He was enormous, not merely tall, but commanding, the kind of presence that reorganized a room the moment it entered. Dark hair, jaw like carved stone, and eyes the color of deep water before a lightning strike. He wore no crown. He didn't need one. Power came off him in slow, visible waves, the particular gravity of a dominant alpha who had never once needed to announce himself. He was here because her father had written to him. A desperate, humiliating letter, Vera had. Found the draft in the study fireplace, half burned, and read enough to understand everything. Lord Ashford's debts had grown fatal. The estate would be forfeit within months. His only currency was his elder daughter, golden-haired, rose-cheeked Lady Isolde, whose beauty had been the talk of the season for 3 years running. Vera was Lord Ashford's younger daughter. She was 22. She had large gray eyes, dark hair she never managed to arrange properly, and a mind that her father had never once asked to use. She was also, as far as this hall was concerned, furniture. "My Lord King," her father said, spreading his hands with the practiced warmth of a man performing generosity he did not feel. "May I present the finest jewel of Ashford, my daughter, Lady Isolde?" Isolde stepped forward. Vera watched her sister move with the practiced grace of a woman who had been trained since childhood to be looked at. The golden hair, the luminous smile, the perfect, devastated composure of someone performing joy over a quiet scream. King Kalen regarded Isolde with eyes that gave nothing away. "Lovely," he said. Flat. A courtesy, not a verdict. Then his gaze moved. It crossed the room with the slow, inexorable sweep of something that missed nothing, past the nervous servants, past the overdressed attendants, and found Vera standing at the back, half hidden by the doorframe, holding her book. He looked at her the way no one ever looked at her. Directly. Vera's spine went rigid. "And this?" The king's voice was quiet. It didn't need to be loud. Her father turned, seemed momentarily confused to find Vera present, as though she had materialized from the wallpaper. "Ah, my younger daughter. Vera. She keeps to herself, my lord. Books and quiet corners." He laughed, a small, dismissive sound. "You needn't concern yourself. What are you reading?" The question came directly at her. No preamble, no performance. Just a dominant alpha whose attention had fixed on something, and who had the absolute certainty of a man accustomed to getting answers. Vera blinked, swallowed. Every instinct she'd spent 22 years developing, make yourself small, take up no space, do not be noticed, screamed at her to look away. She didn't. "Wollstonecraft," she said. "A vindication of the rights of woman." Something shifted in his expression. Barely. A fractional change that she would have missed if she hadn't been watching so carefully. "In your father's drawing room," he said, "during an audience with a king." "You were occupied with my sister," Vera said. "I didn't want to be in the way." The silence that followed was the most charged she had ever stood inside. Then King Kalen turned back to her father, and his voice was the quietest it had been yet, which somehow made it the most absolute. "I'll take the other one." Chapter 2. What He Chose. The carriage to Duskmere took 3 days. Vera spent most of them watching the landscape change. Rolling hills giving way to darker forests, the sky deepening in color as they traveled north, and trying to understand what had happened to her life. She had been given no choice. That was the truth of it. Her father had agreed before she'd finished processing the words, his relief so profound, it had briefly looked like joy. Isolde had stood very still and said nothing, which was its own kind of communication. The king rode ahead on horseback, visible through the carriage window. He didn't check on her. He didn't speak to her. He simply moved through the world with that unhurried certainty, and Vera alternated between furious and terrified, and something she refused to name that lived in her chest when she caught a glimpse of his profile against the gray sky. On the second evening, the carriage stopped at a way-station inn. She was given a room. A meal was sent up, real food, warm, more care taken with it than she'd been shown in years. A knock came at her door. She opened it, to find the king standing in the corridor, still in travel clothes, his dark hair slightly disordered by the wind. Up close, in the low lamplight, he looked less like a force of nature, and more like a man who hadn't slept well in a very long time. "You haven't eaten," he said, nodding toward the untouched tray. "I wasn't hungry." "Eat anyway." He paused. "You're going to need your strength." "For what?" He looked at her steadily. "For whatever comes next. Neither of us knows what that is yet." A beat. That's honest, at least. Vera stared at him. "Why did you choose me?" He was quiet for a moment. She got the sense he was deciding how much to tell her. "Your sister looked at me the way every woman looks at me," he said finally. "Like I am a solution to a problem. Like the question of who I am is less important than what I can offer." He held her gaze. "You looked at me like I had interrupted your reading." Despite everything, a breath of something almost like a laugh escaped her. "You had." "I know." And there, so brief she nearly missed it, the ghost of something warm in his expression. "Finish your meal, Vera." He left. She ate every bite. Chapter 3. Duskmere. The palace rose out of the northern landscape like it had grown there, all dark stone and high towers, built for permanence rather than beauty. But the library? The library stole her breath. It occupied the entire east wing, floor to ceiling on 3 levels, with a curved iron staircase and windows that framed the mountains like paintings. Books she had spent years hearing about and never holding. Political theory, natural philosophy, history, poetry, shelves and shelves of the world's thinking, gathered in one room. "You may use it freely," said the steward who showed her through the palace. "His Majesty's instruction." Vera stood in the center of the library and pressed a hand to her chest. That evening she found a note on the desk in her chambers. Not a letter, a reference, a pamphlet worn at the edges, in the king's handwriting, on the education of women and the wasted minds of nations. His own words. Dense, passionate, radical. He argued that civilizations were only as strong as the sum of their educated citizens, all of their citizens, and that the custom of keeping women ignorant was not tradition. "It is cowardice," he had written. "We fear what a thinking woman might become, so we ensure she never has the chance." Vera read it 3 times. She left it on his desk the next morning with a single line of her own. "Your third argument is your weakest. The economic case is more persuasive than the moral one, because it speaks to the people who need convincing most." She half expected silence, dismissal. What she got, by afternoon, was a reply. "Come to the study at 4 o'clock. Bring your objections." Chapter 4. The study. She had expected an audience, a formal reception, something that would remind her of the distance between them. What she found was a man standing at a window with his sleeves rolled up, surrounded by documents, who turned when she entered and said, "You're right about the economic argument. I knew it when I wrote it. I chose the moral case because I believed it more." Vera set down her own notes and looked at him. "You can believe something and still argue it badly." "I know." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "That's why I want to hear how you'd make it." So she told him, and he listened, not with the polite attention of a man waiting for her to finish, but with the focused, almost hungry engagement of someone who had been starved for genuine conversation. He pushed back. She pushed back harder. He challenged her sources. She challenged his conclusions. At some point, a servant brought tea that went cold while they argued about whether systemic reform or individual education was the more urgent lever. When Vera finally looked up, the window had gone dark. "It's been 4 hours," she said. "Yes." His voice was different now. Lower. The careful restraint he wore like armor had loosened slightly, and underneath it she could see the outlines of who he actually was. Sharp, exhausted, profoundly lonely. "When I was 17, he said, I argued for educational reform before the council. They laughed me out of the room. I have been making the argument in pamphlets ever since, because at least pamphlets cannot interrupt me." "No one takes you seriously," Vera said, and then heard herself and stiffened. Forgive me, that was true." He met her eyes. "No one takes the argument seriously, and I have had no one to make it with who understood it well enough to improve it." He paused. "Until now." The silence between them was different from silence at the way station. Different from silence in her father's hall. It was full. Vera looked down at the papers between them, at the evidence of 4 hours of thinking together, and felt something dangerous unfurl in her chest. Chapter 5. Fracture. The letters from her father began arriving in the 3rd week. They were not letters to her. They were letters about her, addressed to the king's secretary, outlining with increasing boldness the terms of what Lord Ashford now considered a transaction. He had expected the king to take Isolde. Since the king had taken Vera instead, Lord Ashford wished to clarify that the debt arrangement he had anticipated would still apply, that his house was owed consideration, that Vera found out because the king told her himself. He came to the library where she was working and set the latest letter on the table beside her book without preamble. She read it. Her face went very still. "He is negotiating a price for me," she said. "Yes." "He always saw me as worthless." Her voice was flat. "Now that someone wants me, he's decided to calculate my value." She set the letter down carefully, as though it were a live thing. "What will you do?" "I have already written back." "The king said. I told him the debt settlement I made was for your hand and your well-being, not for ongoing financial management of his incompetence. He will receive nothing further." Vera looked up. "He'll be furious." "Yes. He may come here." "Let him," the king said quietly, and his eyes were dark and absolutely certain. "He gave you away, Vera. He does not get to reclaim you as currency." She felt her throat tighten. She pressed her fingertips against the table. "I am not accustomed to being defended." He looked at her for a long moment. "I am aware," he said. "I intend to change that." She nearly broke then. The tears came close enough that she had to turn sharply toward the window, composing herself through sheer force of habit. Behind her, she felt him stay. He didn't leave, didn't fill the silence with platitudes. He simply remained, a solid, steady presence at her back, until she had herself in hand again. "Thank you," she said, still facing the window. "Don't thank me," he said. "It's not a gift. It's the minimum you were always owed." Chapter 6. What Grows in the Dark. It happened in stages, the way spring happened, not in a single day, but in accumulations too small to name, until suddenly the world was different. She learned that he worked before dawn, because sleep came poorly and silence suited him. She began bringing 2 cups of coffee to the study at 5 in the morning. Neither of them commented on it. It simply became what they did. She learned that he had a scar on his left hand from a council vote that had turned violent when he was 19, when he had tried to pass the first version of the education reform, and one of his own lords had taken exception. He had held the vote open with a split palm and won by 3. She learned that he laughed, rare, low, startled, when she argued a point badly, and then immediately corrected herself. "You do that," he told her once. "You lose the thread and then pick it back up sharper than before. I've never seen anyone do that." "Most people don't recover gracefully from being wrong," she said. "No," he agreed. Most people just get louder. He learned that she preferred the cold, that she read 3 books simultaneously and could track all of them, that she had taught herself political philosophy from her father's library because there had been no one to teach her, and she had been hungry enough for ideas to self-educate for a decade. "You are the most rigorously self-made thinker I've encountered," he told her, one late afternoon over a particularly bruising debate on tax reform. "That's a diplomatic way of saying I have enormous gaps." "I have enormous gaps." He looked at her steadily. "We fill different ones." She looked back at him, at this king who had chosen her from a receiving room because she was reading instead of performing, and felt the full, terrifying weight of what was growing between them. It wasn't gratitude. It had stopped being gratitude a long time ago. Chapter 7. The Breaking. The court had opinions. Vera had known they would. She had prepared herself for it, built her armor carefully, composure, intelligence, the visible fact of the king's regard. What she had not prepared for was Lady Corvin. The High Lady arrived at Duskmere for the Autumn Council in a gown of deep crimson, with the particular confidence of a woman who had decided years ago that she was the most important person in any room. She had known the king for a decade. She was beautiful in the aggressive, deliberate way of someone who treated beauty as a weapon. And she found Vera in the library on the second day and delivered her assessment with a smile like a drawn blade. "He'll grow tired of the novelty," she said pleasantly. "He always does. He chose you because you startled him. An unusual woman in a setting he expected to bore him. But curiosity is not love, darling. And when the curiosity fades, what are you?" The smile widened. "An unremarkable girl in a palace that requires a queen." Vera looked up from her book. Her heart was hammering. "Are you finished?" "I'm being kind," Lady Corvin said. "I'm telling you before someone less gentle does. He needs a partner with status, connections, political weight. You have none of those things. You were taken from a failing estate as an afterthought." "He chose me," Vera said quietly. "Yes, because you were standing in the corner holding a book, and it reminded him of a dead woman he loved." Lady Corvin tilted her head. "Did he tell you about her? The scholar queen he was supposed to marry, before she died? That's who you are to him, dear. A ghost, a replacement, a convenience that reads." She left. Vera sat very still for a long time. Then she placed her bookmark carefully, closed her book, and went to find the king. He was in the war room with his generals. She waited in the corridor. When he emerged and saw her face, he dismissed them all without a word. "What happened?" he asked. She told him everything. Every word delivered without tears. She had learned to hold them back too well for too long. He listened. The line of his jaw was very tight. "Is it true?" she asked when she finished. "The scholar queen. Am I a replacement?" He was silent for long enough that her chest constricted. Then he said, "Mara died 6 years ago. She was brilliant and principled, and I loved her. And when she died, I closed every door inside myself that I could reach." He met her eyes. "And then I walked into your father's hall, and a woman in the corner was reading Wollstonecraft instead of watching me. And something that had been locked for 6 years opened before I understood what was happening." He took one step closer. "You are not Mara. You are not like her. You do not remind me of her. You remind me of no one I have ever met. Then what am I to you?" Her voice was barely steady. "The only person," he said, low and certain, "whose opinion I trust without qualification. The only presence that makes the noise in my head go quiet. The only future I can imagine that isn't just obligation and emptiness." He reached up and pressed his thumb against her cheekbone, the first time he had touched her face, and the gentleness of it from a man made entirely of controlled intensity nearly destroyed her composure entirely. "You are not a replacement," he said. "You are the original. I was just waiting, without knowing it." She breathed. One long breath in and out. "Lady Corvin wants your attention," she said. "Lady Corvin has wanted many things from me for a decade. His thumb moved, barely the smallest motion. She has never had my attention. Not the way you do. Chapter 8. The Declaration. The Autumn Council convened with all the ceremony that Duskmere could produce. Every lord and lady of consequence was present. The great hall was lit by hundreds of candles, and the assembled nobility of the kingdom filled it with the low rumble of 100 competing interests. Vera sat in a carved chair to the king's right, not his queen yet, that formal designation pending, and kept her expression composed while she felt the weight of every evaluating gaze in the room. The business of the council proceeded. Lord Fenwick's border dispute, Lady Ashkara's taxation objection, a long, thorny argument about inheritance law that Vera had actually prepared for, having spent 3 evenings with the relevant documents in the library. When Lord Havel made his argument, articulate, well-sourced, and wrong about the primary precedent, a beat of silence fell. Vera spoke. She hadn't planned to. It simply happened, the gap in the argument too obvious, the correction too clear to leave unspoken. Lord Havel's precedent predates the Reformed Charter by 40 years, she said, her voice carrying easily in the sudden quiet. The Maret ruling supersedes it. Under Maret, the inheritance passes not by blood designation, but by formal compact, which means Lord Havel's claim is sound, but his legal basis isn't. She paused. The argument he wants is Maret, Clause 7. He'd be better served making that one. The hall was very still. Lord Havel stared at her. Then slowly, he nodded. The lady is correct. Kaelin, beside her, said nothing, but she felt the shift in him, a slight easing of the tension he carried everywhere, a warmth that didn't show on his face, but she had learned to sense. After the session, as the lords filed out, Lady Corvin passed close and said nothing. Her expression said enough. The Duchess of Marbury, white-haired and formidable, stopped beside Vera's chair. "I knew the late Queen Mara," she said. "She would have liked you." A pause. That is not faint praise. When the hall had emptied, King Kaelin remained in his chair and looked at her. "Maret, Clause 7, he said. He was going to lose on the wrong grounds, Vera said. It seemed wasteful. You defended a man who has spent 3 years opposing my reform agenda. The law doesn't care about his politics. He looked at her for a long moment. Then, come with me. Chapter 9. The Terrace. The night air was cold and clear, the mountains dark against a sky thick with stars. The palace fell away below the terrace wall, and the city of Duskmere spread in points of candlelight down the valley. They stood at the railing, shoulder to shoulder, in the particular silence they had made their own, full, honest, requiring nothing to fill it. My father wrote again, Vera said. He wants to attend the winter celebration, to re-establish the family connection. I know. He'll be charming. He's always charming when he wants something. She wrapped her hands around the cold stone of the railing. He never once looked at me the way you do. In 22 years. Then he is a fool, the king said. Simple. Final. He'll want to use me now. Leverage. The rejected daughter who became a queen. He'll make a story of it that centers himself. He can tell whatever story he likes, Kaelin said. He doesn't get access to you to tell it. Vera turned to look at him. You know I am not easy. I argue. I have opinions. I will disagree with you in council, apparently, without planning to. Yes. Society will never fully accept me. I am not beautiful in the way they value. I will always be the strange choice, the odd one, the girl from the corner. Society, he said, can manage its own discomfort. Kaelin. She said his name deliberately, watching the effect of it, the slight shift in his expression, the way his attention sharpened when she spoke to him as a person rather than a king. I have spent my entire life being invisible, and I have just enough pride left to tell you that I will not survive being forgotten by you. If you choose this, you must choose it, not as novelty, not as a reminder of someone else, not as a useful mind you can put down when the council's done. He turned to face her fully, and in his expression was something she had never seen directed at her by anyone. Absolute certainty. "I have spent 6 years," he said, "managing a kingdom alone because I couldn't imagine wanting someone beside me. I have sat in that council chamber for a decade, and never once had someone who saw the same problems I saw and cared about solving them." He closed the distance between them until there was barely room for the cold air. "And then you walked into my study with your objections, and your cold coffee and your habit of recovering from a weak argument by making a stronger one, and I stopped being alone." He reached up and took her face in both hands, and his eyes were very dark and very close. "You are not a replacement, Vera. You are not a novelty. You are the only person I have ever met whose presence makes the world make more sense." His thumbs traced her cheekbones, slow, careful, like something precious. "I choose this. I choose you. I am asking you to let me." She looked at him for a long moment. At the grief lines around his eyes and the careful, desperate honesty underneath the control. At the man who had picked her out of a corner because she was reading instead of performing, and had spent every day since then choosing to look at her. "I was invisible for 22 years, she said. "I know. I need you to understand what you're asking. To be seen, actually seen, after all of that. It is the most terrifying thing you could offer me." "I know that too," he said. "I am asking anyway." She reached up and covered his hands with her own. "Then yes," she said. "I choose this. I choose you." He kissed her, not gently, not tentatively, but with the restrained intensity of a man who had been holding himself back for months, and finally stopped. His hands moved from her face into her hair, and she gripped the front of his coat, and the mountains, and the stars, and the cold night air simply ceased to matter. When they finally broke apart, breathing unsteady, his forehead dropped to hers. "You left a note on my desk in the 3rd week," he said quietly, "arguing against my own pamphlet. I have read it 9 times. You never told me that." "I was afraid," he said, "of how much it mattered." Vera exhaled. The great Alpha King of Duskmere, afraid of a note. "The great Alpha King of Duskmere," he said, and she could hear the warmth in it now, unmistakable, "was afraid of a woman who read Wollstonecraft in the back of a receiving room and looked at him like an interruption." She laughed. A real one, startled out of her. He pulled her close, and she let herself lean into the solid warmth of him, and the city glittered below them in the dark, indifferent to the fact that a girl who had spent 22 years being overlooked was standing in the arms of a king who had chosen her first. Not despite who she was. Because of it. Epilogue. She never became the Queen Society expected. She was sharper than that. More disruptive. She sat on 3 reforms, committees, and argued publicly with lords twice her age, and edited the king's pamphlets with a red pen that spared nothing. The people called her the Scholar Queen. Some meant it as an insult. It became the highest compliment. Her father came, as predicted, to the winter celebration. He was charming, as predicted. He looked at Vera in her queen's dress beside the king, and saw, at last, what he had overlooked for 22 years. She gave him one conversation. Composed, civil, final. Then she walked back to where Kaelin stood waiting and took his arm, and did not look back. Isolde came too, not with their father, but alone, weeks later, in a quiet letter that said only, "I am happy for you. I believe I have the courage to find my own happiness now. Thank you for showing me what that looks like." Vera wrote back 3 pages. In the evenings, when the palace had quieted and the fires burned low, she and Kaelin sat in the library they had made together, her books mixed with his, their arguments filling the margins of papers neither of them could bear to discard. And the silence between them was the most complete thing either had ever known. Not the silence of being overlooked, the silence of being home. And Vera Ashford, who had spent 22 years invisible in the back of every room she entered, became the woman who changed a kingdom. Not by becoming someone else, but by finally, fearlessly being herself. It was, it turned out, more than enough. It was everything.